So you would think after talking about Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, it would be time to talk about 7. But not quite. See, there's a couple of more games really worth talking about, and that's the Revelations games. These often get overlooked, but I'm here today to give them the attention they deserve. They aren't necessary in the grand scheme of things, no, but think of them more as like side dishes to the main meal. If you ordered a burger combo meal, these games would be the fries. You could skip them if you want, but you'd get a less delicious experience. They take place in between Resident Evil games, similar to the movies, to enrich the lore and give our cast new adventures. This is also sorta considered where the games starring the women of Resident Evil sorta reside now, since none of them have really done anything that could be considered world-endingly important compared to Chris and Leon. This is going to be a much easier, less ranty video to have to make than the last one, because unlike the old school survival horror games, or the new school action horror games, there's not really a divide between fans over which is better. These are really games that sort of strike a perfect balance to meet in the middle and give both sides kind of what they're looking for. As always, spoilers inbound, you know how we do it around here at this point, I speak freely. Starting with Revelations 1, this game is set in between 4 and 5. It stars our girl Jill Valentine on a BSAA mission out at sea to search a ship called the Queen Zenobia, for Chris Redfield, who's gone missing while investigating it. Along with her for this mission is Parker, another BSA agent acting like the Sheva of the story. This ship is clearly infected with some kind of virus, as it's covered in old dead bodies, Dead Space style sludge, and blood. Looking around, they're attacked by a monster, confirming the presence of BOWs, and then we flash back to earlier that day. This is something that the Revelations games do a lot, splice together scenes from different points in time. They're really inspired by cop and spy movies and shows, and they make it very clear, even down to the chapters really being treated as episodes, as you jump between characters, piecing together the mystery. I really respect the way this is done, as it's a different flavor of Resident Evil storytelling, and we've come a hell of a long way since the frankly fucking awful way that multiple scenarios used to work in early Resident Evil games. Jill and Parker at this point in time have been summoned to investigate ashore, next to an old city that was nuked a while ago, Raccoon City style, to stop a BOW terrorist attack by the name of Terra Grigia, which I'm not going to keep spelling over and over every time I need to name it while typing this script, so I'm just going to shorten it to Terra. Anyway, Terra was attacked by a group named Veltro. At this point in Resident Evil lore, the BSAA aren't a monopoly branch of anti-bioterrorism. There's actually another branch called the FBC. Think of them as the Burger King to the BSAA's McDonald's. Similar branches that assist each other but tend to work on different types of cases, with the FBC being the guys you call in when shit gets real, which it did, resulting in the FBC deciding to nuke the whole town and everyone in it to keep the attack from spreading into neighboring cities. The FBC is headed by Morgan Lansdale, and the BSAA is headed by some guy named O'Brien. I'm pretty sure his first name is Clive, but I could be wrong. Who's actually here with us now while we work, handing us over our new toy and the main gimmick of this game, the Genesis. The Genesis is just a scanner that assesses bioorganic material for research later. In terms of gameplay, its use is mostly to create herbs. You fill the scanner bar and you fill up one herb. Different enemies fill the bar at different lengths, and you get more herb juice for scanning things that are alive rather than dead. Pretty nice way to shake up the way herbs and healing work, which we'll talk about in just a second. Scanner also works as a way to find hidden ammo and items in the world. Helpful, but not necessary. Just a little something to reward you for using it every now and then. I like this little scanner thing. It's neat while not being completely intrusive. You could play most of this game and forget it's even a mechanic. For right now, we're using it to scan these weird fleshy things, which are all over the shore here, some of which are alive and nowhere close to friendly. While working, we find a mysterious vial inside one of them, and O'Brien receives a call and tells Jill that Chris and his partner Jessica have gone missing. Resuming where we left off in real time, Jill and Parker continue looking for Chris on the ship, coming across a woman who's killed before they can get to her, who will be important later, but for right now, They're lured into a trap with a fake Chris doll that is surprisingly accurate, and are captured by some dude in a mask. Turns out, Chris was never even on the fucking ship in the first place. He was on a separate mission to investigate an old Veltro base around the same time that Jill boarded the ship. They simply couldn't make contact due to harsh weather conditions. But when they do make contact, O'Brien lets Chris know that now Jill has gone missing, and Chris and Jessica call off their current mission and go after them. Jill wakes up deeper in the ship and escapes her room, meeting up with Parker, claiming their gear back and looking for a way to contact HQ and get the fuck out of there. And with the initial story now set up, it's time to talk gameplay. The gameplay is mostly like the last few games before it. Over-the-shoulder shooter that at this point is simply the industry standard. Emphasis is on precision and well-placed shots. What separates this game from the last few are the way the inventory management works. Little more of that ammo conservation from the old days has been injected back into the DNA, only less strict. You'll still feel it, but not so much to where you're gonna brick your fucking playthrough or something. The item boxes are back after being missing from the franchise for about 8 years, but they've been streamlined into being probably the most tolerable example of them in the franchise. You're not gonna be wasting time running back and forth because your stupid ass shotgun or armor key won't fit in your inventory. Your ammo isn't even stored in your inventory. All that shit has been left in 1996 where it fucking belongs. Instead, the game has the usual plethora of weapons to choose from and swap between. The standard pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, Resident Evil shit. But you can only hold 3 at a time. And since if you have any common sense, one of the slots will always be taken up by your handgun, that leaves room for 2 big boy weapons. That also applies to green herbs, which are the only kind needed in this game. There's no real status screen or health bar to speak of, more so that as you take damage, the screen gets bloodier and loses more and more color, letting you know how close you are to death. Green herbs have been buffed to first aid spray tier and heal you basically to full health. The catch is, you can only hold so many in your inventory and can only hold so much ammo as well. Typically, I hate this kind of shit in games, but I would much rather have an ammo cap than spend half of my fucking playtime trekking back to item boxes whenever I need bullets or to store bullets. This still gives you a reason to backpedal every now and then, just a little across the ship if you remember you left an ammo box here or an herb there because you couldn't pick it up at the time, but not to the point of putting you to fucking sleep. Smart and clever ways to bring back some old school ideas in a way that isn't going to get on someone like me's fucking nerves like they used to, reinvented to better blend with how the franchise has evolved for the better over time. For example, I mentioned ammo scarcity, but enemies still will occasionally drop bullets when you kill them, in case you are completely dry on everything. But instead of letting yourself get dry on everything in the first place, you should instead run back to the item box and maybe replace a weapon running low with something else for a little while. Encouraged, but not forced. In terms of health, the line between full health and holy fuck you're about to die status is pretty damn wide, and you never know when the next attack or grab from something will kill you, which makes using a green herb a big deal. To sort of sidestep that big deal, no pun intended, the dodge mechanic is back. It works less like Resident Evil 6 and more like Resident Evil 3, where you have to time it with the enemy's attack to add a bit of a skill requirement, as different attacks have different timings. Fuck it up and you'll be spending one of those precious herbs. Now, to deal with these caps on things, as you explore the Queen Zenobia, you can find ammo pouches to allow you to carry more ammo or herbs. I use the term explore very loosely because you can go off the beaten path every now and then, but don't get it twisted. This may look like the Spencer Mansion, but it ain't. You can look around slightly, but this is still a locked-in linear game mostly. Where you can go is kind of locked off by chapter. If the game doesn't want you somewhere, it will make it very clear most of the time. There's really only a couple of designated exploration chapters in the game, and that's fine with me. As far as enemies, typically called ooze monsters, this time around I won't say that I dislike them or anything, I'm just kinda indifferent to them. The combat in this game is fine, but coming off of 4, 5, and especially 6, it feels like a step down. You shoot things, and for the most part they don't really react or care, and everything is extremely spongy, which is something not even the shotgun can solve. They have a stagger chance. It's not really as big of a problem as it's about to be in the Winters games, but you will definitely feel it. When I first ever played this game as a teenager in the early chapters, I wasn't really feeling it, but that's because I wasn't understanding the new melee system, which I thought was completely gone. It's not, it's just a little different from what you're used to. Likely what you'll do if you don't know any better is load this game up, start popping shit in the head, and realize that didn't prompt a melee and feel the downgrade. But in reality, a lot of enemies have specific weak points. Something that I wish the scanner would fucking show you. On something like the basic grunts, it's actually their arms. If you shoot both of them out, they'll go limp and you can get your melee off. Unlike the mainline games, it's complete dog shit unless you charge it. That's where the money's at. Once you start to realize that, it becomes a mind game. You could stun an enemy and attempt a full charged attack, but you might get hit by his buddies for getting greedy. So you might want to cash out the damage early and let go. Or you could hold on to the charge, trying intentionally to catch the rest of his buddies. There's even more strats and tactics when it comes to maxing damage on these in multiplayer. Oh yeah, multiplayer. Sadly, you can kiss the co-op of the last few games goodbye now. At least in the main game, which is kinda silly because what's the point of Chris and Jill still having partners for damn near the entirety of the game if there's no co-op? Now, in other modes that's a different story, but we'll save that for later. I guess maybe part of that is a limitation of the hardware. You see, Revelations 1, if you couldn't tell by how it looks, was originally released as a mobile spin-off game for the DS or some shit, before being so well received and beloved that it was remastered and reworked into a traditional Resident Evil console experience. Which is why it feels so weird to control movement-wise and looks the way it does. And yeah, let's keep it real. It looks respectable for what it is, but it can look kinda ass sometimes, even compared to Resident Evil 5. It's not an issue of lighting or shadows or anything like that, more so just the texture and polygon budget. Capcom tried to bring it up to snuff for PlayStation 3 standards of the time, and they did what they could, but they're not magicians. This ain't no Crisis Core reunion, let's put it that way. Lastly, new to this game is the weapon parts. Kinda the signature of the Revelation games. As you explore and progress, you can find upgrades to improve ammo capacity, damage, all the type of shit you would expect. Think power nodes from Dead Space. I will briefly mention that Jill has a new face model in this game. For some reason, those fucking weirdos who spend their entire life making fan accounts on Twitter and Tumblr and shit thought this was like a really big deal at the time. Honestly, I don't really give a fuck that much. Actors change all the time. How much this seemed to matter to people is even more hilarious considering everyone got replaced shortly after this, so they did a bunch of fucking whining over nothing in the grand scheme of things. Either way, it's Jill, and I get to stare at her in this wetsuit for the next several hours, so I don't give a fuck. Moving on. Now that Jill and Parker have all their gear, their next course of action is to head to the flight deck and try to contact HQ and report back the situation. Getting there, they find all the equipment smashed and destroyed, as well as their boat they came in on bombed. And they're jumped by Parker's old friend Raymond. This nigga is ugly as shit. Oh my god, dude, what the fuck? The game then flashes back to the Terra City nuke incident. As it turns out, Raymond and Parker know each other pretty well as Raymond is an FBC Rook, and Parker is ex-FBC turned BSAA, as well as Jessica. Now, explaining this flashback, simply how the game presents it, is a challenge because the game will later flash back again to just before where it flashes back here, so I'm just gonna discuss this whole flashback sequence ordeal and combine them both in chronological order so that I will never have to talk about this again. So, during the incident, Parker, Jessica, and Raymond were part of the team assisting rescue efforts in the city, trying and failing to contain the outbreak. Raymond feels like something is off about this whole thing, and starts asking some hard-ass questions that his peers shut him down for some reason. His suspicions lead to him eavesdropping on Lansdale, who you can tell is evil just by looking at him. He's currently in bed with Veltro, having helped them attack this city so he can keep the government funding the FBC, but nobody has caught on to his shenanigans at this point in time. besides maybe Raymond, who happened to walk in just as Lansdale and Norman, who's the leader of Veltro, argue and double-cross each other, with Lansdale having gotten the green light from the government to nuke the city Hammer of Dawn style, which solves the problem of Norman, who got the feeling he might be double-crossed and recorded all his interactions. O'Brien, who was also present for this incident, never approved of the Resident Evil Hammer of Dawn, and is horrified by what they're about to do, but since the FBC at the time had higher authority over the BSAA, he had to just eat shit. But after this, Parker and Jessica left the FBC to join the BSAA out of disapproval, while Raymond stayed with the FBC. Back in real time, Raymond tells them to fuck off and leave, so they search around and make a plan to hit up the comms room directly, in the hopes of contacting HQ. This leads to our first boss fight, and a run-in with the chainsaw enemy of this game, the Skagdad, who happens to have the key we need. By the time they get to the comms room proper, it's also smashed to shit, but Raymond claims he didn't do it. They also catch a worldwide broadcast of Norman from Veltro, who's resurfaced after the Terra City incident with a virus called the T-Abyss that he threatens to infect 1/5 of the Earth's waters with. This is the same vial Jill and Parker found on the beach earlier that day. Because the person who knocked out Jill had the same kind of mask on, they believe it was Norman, and that Veltro is on this ship. Raymond is looking for his partner Rachel, who he hasn't been able to reach in forever. As it would turn out, the comm system is damaged but still usable. It just needs power from the main router, and they'll have to cut through the casino and take a lift down. Problem with that is, the lift is missing a key, and the last person to have it was Rachel, who was actually the woman Jill saw get killed earlier, and she ain't exactly so dead anymore. She's also surprisingly sexy for an ooze monster. Just hear me out for a second. Anyway, from this point on, she'll chase the player around the ship every now and then. But it is nothing as fucking annoying as it will be a couple of games from now, as unlike those, you are actually encouraged to shoot her and make her run away if you can. With our new shiny key, we head for the power room. This is when the game interjects the story of some more side characters who I'm just gonna call by their code names, Grinder and Jackass. By this point in the series, creating worthless throwaway characters that will never matter after one game is basically in full swing and completely out of control. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about their role in the story in full right now as well, so this shit doesn't become a jumbled mess. Not that I dislike them, I mean they're cool and all, they're just comic relief in an otherwise serious game. They're basically the guys called in to finish Chris and Jessica's original mission to investigate this area for any Veltro activity, which they are able to confirm, as well as grab a shit ton of data on their operations before Lansdale is able to bomb the site and prevent them from getting it. See, this is where the plot starts to confuse me a bit. As it turns out, Veltro isn't actually back in action. It's a trick by O'Brien, using an old abandoned Veltro base and old unreleased footage like the T-Abyss video from earlier to scale Lansdale enough to do something stupid and incriminate himself. Which he does end up doing. But in the case of this airport, even though I can only assume these are BSAA agents dressed up as Veltro, these monsters are actually real, dangerous, and kill quite a few BSAA guys. So that means either they set all this up without making sure the area was clear of any BLWs, or O'Brien sprinkled some of them around the site to make it look more authentic. The first option being straight up incompetence, and the later option just being straight up a fucking crime? Also a betrayal of his team that are only doing what is asked of them. Unless I'm missing something here, this part of the plot is definitely morally questionable? Returning to Jill, the ship has been severely damaged and is starting to flood. They managed to get the power on, but almost drowned doing it. Looks like Chris might be their only hope, as he arrives just in time and begins searching with Jessica, but something isn't adding up. The ship is almost exactly the same in layout, but the actual state of things on a room-by-room basis isn't the same, including the lack of flooding, because in reality, they're not on the same ship. Veltro created more than one ship to operate from, and Chris has found the Queen Ceremaias, not the Queen Zenobia. So, Jill and Parker have to save themselves from drowning, and try to contact HQ again, only to find that the antenna on top of the observation deck needs to be repaired too. Bro, not a single fucking thing works on this ship. What is this? Dead Space? Trying to fix that results in a boss fight with whatever this thing is. and fixing it, they manage to give their location to O'Brien. As a result, giving their location to Lansdale, who makes his move and aims his Hammer of Dawn at every known Veltro base up to this point, confirming O'Brien's suspicions that he was involved in the Terra City attack. Chris won't be able to reach them in time unless they can get to the foredeck and use a UAV to confuse the satellites targeting them. Doing that and piloting it remotely, they manage to buy themselves enough time for Chris and Jessica to reach the Zenobia, with them walking in on our masked assailant from earlier that Jessica fires on for no reason, as he doesn't appear to be hostile at all. The guy in the mask isn't Norman at all. It's actually Raymond, who's orchestrated this whole thing with O'Brien to make the fake Veltro thing even more believable. He appears to die without fully revealing the mystery to everyone, who are all kind of still in the dark on things and haven't been filled in by O'Brien just yet. The ship is fucked beyond repair, and they decide to split up. Chris and Jill will try to deal with the virus on the ship's lab, while Parker and Jessica try to see if they can do anything to slow the ship from sinking a little longer. Chris and Jill look around the lab a bit for information on any kind of vaccine or cure, and run into my second favorite enemy of the game, who I forgot all about up until now, these weird Night Guardian things. They really will test your skill and make sure you know how to dodge if you want to fight them optimally. Found in the lab and the evidence for themselves that Lansdale was behind the Terra City incident, the cat is out of the bag and Lansdale stops playing hero. Meanwhile, Parker is growing suspicious of Jessica. She fired on Raymond earlier like she was trying to get him to be quiet, and one of the last things Raymond said to him was not to trust her. Add to that, she ran ahead of him to the flight deck, almost as if she was trying to get there first. She might be a mole for Lansdale, so Parker holds her at gunpoint, which Raymond interjects in since he ain't so dead after all either. Because Parker is conflicted on trusting Raymond, in the confusion, Jessica makes her move and shoots Parker and sets the ship to self-destruct. Raymond has no choice but to go after her and leave Parker behind. Chris and Jill find Parker and try to race to the flight deck for extraction, but a wounded Parker is too slow and seemingly falls to his death. Chris and Jill make their escape, but both ships are now destroyed by Lansdale, and it seems he's going to get away with it, as there's no evidence. Even managing to storm and detain the BSAA HQ to cover up his operations. But, using intel from Jackass, they find a third and final ship, the Queen Dido, and Norman's main ship. It's their last hope, otherwise he wins and will frame O'Brien instead. The Dido was sunken in the Hammer of Dawn strike that took out Terra City, so Chris and Jill deep dive to infiltrate it. The weird fleshy growths that have washed up on shore earlier in the game came from the Dido. Norman, after being portrayed as a last resort, infected himself and his entire ship with the T-Abyss virus, intent on guarding all their evidence of Lansdale's involvement. His other two ships followed his example afterwards. After months of solitude, he's been driven mad. Norman is the final boss of the game. But it's funny to me how this is the only example I can think of in Resident Evil history where the main characters try to have the common sense not to wait around for the boss to transform. And then Norman just kind of yells, "Hey, stop!" And they just do? What the fuck? Anyway, this boss fight is kind of a bitch, but it's also one of my favorites in the series. Matter of fact, ever since the introduction of movement while shooting and dodge mechanics, I can't think of a single boss fight from 6 onwards that I haven't liked. But Chris and Jill, like old times, take out the bad guy and save not only the world, but also the BSAA. As with Lansdale involvement now publicly broadcast, he's arrested instead. Job well done. Things get a little weird here because we then see Jessica and Raymond meet up in a diner. They're revealed as spies who have been playing everyone like a fiddle and working for some organization to retrieve the T-Abyss virus for research. In the end, that organization I can only assume is the same one that becomes Tricell ultimately. And after Lansdale is arrested, the rest of the FBC is absorbed into the BSAA, making it the giant that it will be by the time of Resident Evil 5. That, of course, is the main story complete, but Revelations has its own exclusive take on the mercenaries concept in the form of raid mode to look at. What sets it apart from traditional mercenaries is that in most of raid mode, time is not a factor. This is more about trying to survive and clear the stage in general under certain conditions, as opposed to trying to keep a kill streak going. You pick your favorite characters that each have their own perks and weaknesses, and they level up like they would in an RPG, while you receive loot in the form of weapon parts and guns to equip to tackle harder and higher level stages. Think something like Borderlands. This mode was hella popular back in this game's prime. Even solo, the hours I spent grinding out missions day after day is uncountable. But these days, it's mostly a ghost town, and that's because everything that raid mode does in this game, the second game will do even better. The only real problem is because you have to select characters and level them up independently, that means that matchmaking, as you can imagine, is sort of chaotic, and especially unreliable at low levels. The lower you are, the longer you'll likely be playing by yourself, which is kinda counterproductive to the appeal of this mode, which is the multiplayer. And that wraps up the first Revelations game. A pretty impressive handheld game that, when you boil it down, really has what it takes to stand side by side with its main console counterparts, being originally so impressive that it was converted into a console game. And its sequel does everything it does, but better. Resident Evil Revelations 2 was developed with no handheld console in mind. From the ground up, it was always just complimentary Resident Evil, set in between the events of 5 and 6. The first game starred Jill, this one stars Claire Redfield. That's just how it goes. After the events of the first game, as well as Resident Evil 5, Tricell is basically as dead as Umbrella. Terra Grigia's memory is preserved through a company called Terra Save, that focuses on supporting and helping victims of bioterrorism attacks. Our girl Claire Redfield works for this company, as well as Barry Burton's daughter, Moira. I'm a bit hazy on Claire's work here in relation to her work as a journalist as well, since we know she does that. The game makes it clear Moira doesn't have the best relationship with Barry, and at an employee get-together party, they're ambushed by mercenaries and all captured. When Claire wakes up, she's in a prison cell just like the good old days, but the cell opens on its own the instant she wakes up, almost as if something is controlling it. Soon as she finds Moira in a nearby cell, hers too opens up as if remote controlled. This is one of those old school Silent Hill looking prisons that are run down, brown, grimy, tortured bodies everywhere, real good vibes. Honestly, it's such a shame that this area of the game is so short and just a footnote, because really, I would have loved to have spent more time here. Regardless, the two run into one of their old co-workers who dies on the spot, and Claire manages to secure a gun for herself and a flashlight and crowbar for Moira, before all hell breaks loose and they're attacked by infected. While exploring, they're contacted by someone called the Overseer that seems obsessed with fear, and can tell how scared they are by the bracelets she's placed on everyone that change color in response to their emotions. This is clearly an experiment of hers, as she's infected everyone here with some sort of virus, so if they get too scared, they'll mutate. For now, they've got to find a way out of the prison in the usual Resident Evil style. You know, go here, find that thing, plug that thing into the other thing while you turn power on so you can press that switch, that kind of shit. Suppose now is as good of a time as any to talk about Claire's half of the game in terms of gameplay. Resident Evil Revelations is the idea of taking the action horror approach of Resident Evil 4 to 6 and blending in those old school elements. In this second game, that is fully realized in a way the first game did, but with the advantage of being built from the ground up as a console game, so it isn't held back by the things that the previous Revelations was. It's the same solid third-person shooting that's expected out of Resident Evil at this point in terms of combat, but returning are both easy to understand weak points in the form of traditional headshots and to stun melee follow-ups that we've come to expect from most of the games at this point. None of that weird arm shooting shit from Revelations 1. Also, dodging has been brought back to being a thing you can freely do whenever you want, similar to 6. But it's been much more watered down and simplified. Now you just do a simple dodge. I'm sad to see all that depth from 6 go, but dodging in this game is fine, and any dodge is better than no dodge. I can do it whenever the fuck I want to, and not when the game decides I can dodge, and that's what's important. Returning from Resident Evil 3, we have crafting. You can't craft ammo, but you can craft things to deal with status effects like bleeding, being blinded by bloater glue, that kind of shit. I'm on the fence about this sort of thing because I find dealing with these status effects from certain things annoying, and they've never brought it back since, but on the other hand, this kind of idea does work as intended. And I think they should stick with this in future Revelations games, as it helps give them their own unique thing without making them so far removed from the mainline games. The other thing you can craft are bottles that function as the grenades from the prior games. Decoys, explosives, molotovs, smoke bottles, that kind of thing. Healing works the same way as it did in the first game as well, as opposed to traditionally, in that one single green herb will heal you back to full health. Change from the first game is that previously, no matter what was going on, you just tapped the button and healed instantly. Didn't matter if you were mid-grab, had just gotten knocked down, or anything. Here, like 5 and 6, Claire has to heal in-game, in-world. It takes time. And I love when horror games work like this, as opposed to letting you just escape to a menu. Keeps me engaged in the world. On the returning mechanics list, we also have weapon parts and skill points. Weapon parts work the way they did in Revelations 1, and skill points are a little more traditional than they were in 6. Instead of buying skills and slotting them in, you gain skill points and then use them on a skill tree that can upgrade things like the range on your dodge, increases in melee damage, consumable capacity, that kind of thing. Also, more like a traditional Resident Evil game, weapon workbenches function as light item boxes to store weapons and materials. Since this is a real console game now, we're back to swapping weapons with the D-pad Resident Evil 5 style. I was about to type that this is the first mainish line Resident Evil game to have stealth mechanics, but then I remembered they were in 6, but here they make much more sense and are less jank. It works the way you think it works. You creep up on a motherfucker, catch them lacking, and take them out. This is the final game so far of having a companion character to back you up throughout the game. And unfortunately, it goes out on a sad whimper. We'll talk about Barry's when we switch to him, but Claire's partner is of course Moira. What's my problem with her? Well, see, unlike in previous games, Moira refuses to use guns. Her reason being, when she was younger, Barry, being the fucking doofus that he is, left his gun case unlocked, and she ended up finding one, playing around with it, and shooting her sister on accident. Pretty sure her sister survived, but that created a rift between her and Barry that has never healed. I'm sorry, call me insensitive, but this is a retarded ass reason not to pick up a fucking gun given the circumstances. Yeah, trauma hurts and all. You know what else hurts more than emotional damage? The physical damage of getting disemboweled alive by a mutant because you want to run around with a stupid fucking crowbar. It's silly. Barry's companion Natalia has an excuse because she's a little girl. Moira doesn't. Moira helps in combat through shining her light on enemies, which can, like, 2% of the time stun them, even with upgrades. Her light can also show hidden ammo and valuables that Claire for some reason can't see. Natalia can also do this, and while this may have sounded like something really nice to put in the game when a bunch of guys were in a room brainstorming mechanics on paper, what this actually leads to is you spending the majority of the game walking into a room, switching to the sidekick, and letting them scan for ammo and supplies every time you take a couple of steps. I get that this is supposed to be an evolution of the scanner mechanic from the original game. I get that they also wanted to make your companion feel useful and give you a reason to switch to them every now and then. But I don't know, man, I would just really rather focus on being Claire and doing Resident Evil shit. Moira's saving grace is being hot and having the personality I like, but outside of that, she's really just a better Ashley from Resident Evil 4 if you think about it. Lastly, let me just say this game looks fucking amazing. This is the last of the lineup as far as the PlayStation 3 generation of Resident Evil games. And in fact, it was a cross-gen release. This is the best of what Capcom's MT framework engine had to offer. Now, the cutscenes are pre-rendered, and their presentation is a step down from how beautiful Resident Evil 6 looked. Granted, the first game's cutscenes were also pre-rendered, but in terms of in-engine looks, I gotta give the win to Revelations 2 here. Yeah, the texture work is still pretty PS3 looking, but the lighting, the effects like fog, the depth of field, the smoke, the haze, it all comes together into something that is still good looking even now. Once again, we really haven't come too far from the PS3 era in terms of visuals today. This generation really perfected the look of games as an idea, and all we've been doing since then is refining and improving how we deliver on this look with new engines and tools. Finding their way out of prison, they realize they've actually been stranded on an island. They try to radio for help with a nearby tower to no avail. From here, we switch to Barry, arriving on the island to look for Moira. As soon as he gets here, he meets his companion, Natalia. This game, like the first, does this sort of episodic thing where they try to imitate a TV show. Each episode you'll play half as Claire and half as Barry. Back in these days, there was this fad that games like Telltale's The Walking Dead started of dropping games in episodes every month or so. The next one would drop and you'd buy it until you had a complete game. This allowed companies to get parts of the game out sooner to the fans, but for a lot of other people, they'd really just rather wait until the game is out fully, which is why you don't really see this anymore. Outside of that early access Steam shit, I guess. But, like I said, I still appreciate the thought and spirit behind what these Revelation games are trying to do here. You play an episode, finish it, it ends on a cliffhanger and teases you with the next part of the story. You go do some real life shit because you're not a fucking loser. Come back later, complete the next one, get a recap on the story, rinse and repeat until the game is done. Barry and Claire play almost identically, he just has a different loadout, and has his own flashlight. I wish they had given him different animation data though, because everyone in the game uses Claire's animations, which are built for a woman. So he looks really weird as the heavy-set strongman, prancing around like a slim-frame female, but eventually you get used to it. Natalia, however, plays a bit differently from Moira. She doesn't get a dedicated weapon to use. Instead, she has to pick up bricks in the world to throw at enemies, to stun them and help Barry out. She can also see enemies regardless of if they're behind walls because she's infected, and her bracelet has been red basically forever, but she never mutated. This allows her to see invisible enemies that Barry and Claire can't, as well as detect weak points on certain enemies. She also does the whole, I'm small, I can crawl into spaces thing, standard stuff. Barry decides to let her tag along, and they're trying to get to the radio tower Moira and Claire sent their distress signal from earlier. But things are a bit different around here. All the infected in Claire's half of the game are fresh. All the ones in Barry's are decayed and skeletal because his campaign takes place about 6 months after Claire's. When they get to the radio tower to look for any clues, Barry says Moira's name out loud, only for Natalia to say that she's dead, ending episode 1. Switching back to Claire, she runs into some of her old co-workers, Gabe, and I think this other guy's name is Pedro, who have been separated from their other co-worker, Neil. And they hold up in a little nearby town until the overseer contacts them and spouts some more villain mumbo jumbo. They find a rundown helicopter and work on getting it running again with spare parts from around the town. But before they can really do anything, the overseer sounds off the sirens around the town and lures all the infected around to their location for a good old Resident Evil Siege section, which sends Pedro's bracelet into the red and ensures that he's a goner and will return. This becomes a real big problem because he picked up a giant ass drill earlier, and now that he's turned, he's using it to try to do some not so nice things to everyone. Consider this our chainsaw enemy type of this game. Getting caught by his drill charge is instant death, and he's more than they can handle right now, so they run for it, running into Neil, who saves them in the nick of time. For now, they're just gonna have to leave Gabe behind with the chopper. They don't have a choice. Their next plan is to get to the giant tower in the sky since it's where the overseer is. In the process of traveling, Neil is separated from them again and Claire and Moira run into Natalia. The problem here, as many have pointed out, is that they basically shit on Claire's established character here by having her scare Natalia only for Moira to step up and calm her down. As if Claire didn't build her entire identity as a beloved character from being great with children on multiple occasions or something. Shitting on established lore for the sake of putting over your brand new character is called garbage writing, or as I like to call it, pulling a Gears of War 5. Either way, when they get closer to the tower, Gabe flies overhead having gotten the chopper running, only to have it EMP'd out of the sky by the overseer. In the distraction, Natalia is kidnapped and we switch over to Barry hot on the group's trail. There isn't really too much to say about his half of this episode as he's really just running cleanup duty. For example, he kills Pedro himself after finding him. One thing I forgot to mention, certain things you do as Claire can impact Barry's campaign in small ways. Like finding a weapon or shooting the explosive goo off an enemy that will land on the floor and then be something Barry can potentially use against enemies in his side of the campaign. Barry and Natalia head for the tower and stumble upon this weird hideout with broken dolls and stuffed animals everywhere. Man, it really feels like the best areas in this game are the ones you're only in briefly, because they stumble on a picture of Albert Wesker, and what Natalia reveals is his sister, Alex Wesker. Remember how Resident Evil 5 said that Albert was the last surviving child? Well, these niggas lied to you. Back then, there were two left, Albert and Alex. Now, it's just Alex, the overseer. Like her brother, she's a scientific genius. They're then jumped by a weird humpback lady, and the cliffhanger sends us back to Claire. Looking for Natalia, they find a note from Neil that says to head for the factory. So that's what they do. This factory level is probably my favorite in the game. It feels very The Evil Within in aesthetic, which is funny because these games both came out at roughly the same time. As we cut through the factory, Alex sets it to blow up as she's gathered all the data she needs, and to escape we end up in the sewers and meet this Russian old man who's been living here, and allows them to pass to the tower in the sky, where to Claire's disappointment and horror, she finds out that her little boyfriend Neil is actually a scumbag who sold them and TerraSave out to Alex to use for her experiments in exchange for helping him bring back the FBC. He's Lansdale's sort of apprentice on some Anakin Skywalker type shit, and after he got locked up, Neil decided to take over his legacy and try his best to get the FBC brought back. Listen, Claire has a history of liking bad boys and all, but she's gotta learn to pick them better because this shit is getting ridiculous. She even cries over it. Again. Alex, just like her brother, discards Neil once he served his purpose, and sets him to turn, never intending to follow through with her end of the bargain in the first place. And he serves as a boss fight once he transforms. They seemingly kill him, and hop in the elevator to the top of the tower, but Neil wakes back up and attacks them, disarming and pinning Claire. This is where the game fucks up royally in my opinion. This idea of multiple endings should have been left in the 90s as a dead relic of this franchise where it fucking belongs. See, you have two choices here. You can either let Claire pick up the gun, which will result in Moira's death later, or you can let Moira save Claire with the gun, which results in Moira surviving later. And it is fucking stupid. As I've said before, in a series like this where canon and events are important in terms of how every game connects, and especially in terms of main characters and what happens to them and how they act when they return in later entries, it makes zero sense to even do this. What the fuck does this even do for anyone besides waste their time and fool morons into thinking they're getting more replayability than they actually are? This is a waste of everyone's fucking time. They're not gonna kill Barry's daughter in canon, and they made an entire DLC focused on her and what she was doing in the 6 months of surviving. DLC which was planned in advance, as seeds of that are planted in the main game. So why even fucking bother with this? This is a waste of time. This is time you could have spent doing something like designing more cool locations to take the player through. Or better yet, why not expand on some of your best ones that I've already mentioned earlier in the game? This is a problem here and in the next game, so expect me to rant about it there, because it's even worse there than it is here. But for now, that's the end of Claire for a bit while she makes her way up the elevator, with Alex shown to have Natalia, as Neil was the one who kidnapped her and delivered her to Alex when Claire wasn't looking. Back to her and Barry we go. Turns out this hunchback is Alex, and she seems obsessed with trying to kill Natalia. Barry questions her on Moira, and Alex says she killed her and everyone else 6 months ago. Now, she didn't, but because of what happened here, she thinks she did. More on that a little later. This sends Barry into a rage, and they escape the ambush after Barry swears revenge. And that becomes his ultimate goal now, to kill Alex. Passing through the sewers, Barry finds the old man dead, as well as Moira's phone where she's recorded a goodbye message to her family, including Barry. They explore the island some more and get ambushed yet again by Alex, who knocks Barry out, starts to strangle Natalia, and then stops and screams when she sees her reflection in her eyes. Ending the episode and switching us back to Claire. Claire's last section in the final episode is very brief and really just exposition. See, from what I understand, this entire operation was Alex's desperate attempt to save herself from a terminal illness. She spent forever looking for a way to stop it, until one day, while Albert was visiting her, he shared his plans for Ouroboros with her, to create his new world. Intrigued by what he had come up with, She used his creation after he died to see if it might help her. In making some of her own adjustments, she's figured out a way to transfer her consciousness over to a new body, to inhabit, so that she can retain all her knowledge and start fresh. That's where Neil comes in. Neil's been using TerraSave as a front to help Alex find people to experiment on, usually taking a survivor here and there that they save from bioterrorist incidents, which is how Natalia got there. Claire, Moira, and everyone else brought here were all singled out by Neil personally as potential vessels for Alex, but none are as perfect for her to move to as Natalia. And now that she has her, she's made the transfer, which should take around 6 months if her estimates are correct. So she puts her to sleep in a safe place underground. But Alex isn't as stupid as Simon from Soma, so she knows she hasn't made a transfer, but a copy of her mind. So to prevent there being 2 Natalias and to free herself from the pain of her illness, she does the old unalive in front of Claire and Moira, much to their confusion. And she's rigged the whole place to blow, but only the upper part of it so that Natalia is safe. While trying to escape, Moira is crushed and pinned by falling debris, and tells Claire to run to save herself. This is where she fake dies if you made the proper choice in the Neil fight, and actually dies if you made the wrong one. But this too is executed like complete dog shit from top to bottom. Ignoring how the player has no way of knowing they were making any sort of important decision there in the first place, you aren't really given enough time to let Moira get her supposed final words out. As if you try to listen to what she has to say, which is very important for her character as well as the game, as this is supposed to be a gut punch moment here, the player is supposed to think she really is about to die and this is supposed to be the last time you see her, you're left with mere seconds to turn around and leave, and 9 times out of 10 you likely won't make it. It's almost like they designed this part, programmed it, and just never fucking tested it. Because if they had, they would have figured out that Moira and Claire's back and forth taking 25 seconds out of the 30 seconds they give you to leave here can only be described as complete head-assery game design. Regardless, Claire jumps into the ocean to escape. Now, we could talk about the fact that jumping into the water from how high she was up should have killed her, or ask how the fuck anyone even managed to find an unconscious Claire in the ocean who should have drowned, even if she survived the fall, since she has nowhere close to any kind of safety or civilization to get to, and no one had even come looking for her. But you know how it is with Resident Evil, this is the shit you just have to kind of wave away and let rock. We got motherfuckers crashing cars that proceed to explode into flames as they get out completely unharmed. If it hasn't dawned on you since Code Veronica that these plots are fucking ridiculous and not to ask any questions, you probably should just quit the franchise, it's never gonna make you happy. We're 3 out of 10 on main games that don't have ridiculous plots. And it ain't going away anytime soon, trust me. Either way, Claire is found and she tells Barry at the hospital that Moira is dead, which sent Barry to the island in the first place, meaning this man had to be told 3 fucking times by people that Moira is dead before he accepted it. Which speaks to his character, but it's still funny to me. Speaking of which, Claire thinks Moira is dead because she saw it. Alex thinks she's dead because she set the whole place to self-destruct and thinks everyone is dead. But how the hell does Natalia think she's dead? She wasn't there. I'm gonna assume she only does because she's gaining parts of Alex's memories as she tries to take control of her mind or something, which is why she had a headache when she said it. I don't know. Regardless, it's time for Barry to close out the story. After he wakes up from being bitch slapped, Natalia tells him Alex just ran off randomly, and now their plan is to catch her and put her down for good. Traveling back up the mountain into the mines, and through yet another creepy old mansion that's a front for a lab that was developing the T-Phobos virus, which is the result of her further developing her work on Albert's Ouroboros project, is just Resident Evil type shit through and through. It's in this lab that we run into Alex for the last time. As I explained earlier, Natalia is going to awaken as Alex eventually. The reason this Alex is still alive is because when she shot herself before, just before she pulled the trigger, she fucked up and felt fear, knowing that her current her will cease to exist, and never know if her plan succeeded. Because of that, the virus saved her from death just like the G virus did Albert. Only Alex started to mutate into a hideous monster. She's so jealous of the fact that the other her will be beautiful and better in every way that she's hard set on killing her and undoing her entire project. For some reason, she seems to think if she kills Natalia, the current her can just steal her body, knowing damn well that's not how that works. But regardless, Barry isn't gonna let that happen. So we battle her for a minute until she gets the upper hand and grabs Natalia. But who other than Moira is here to save the day, shooting guns? Do you see how useful you can be to the team when you learn to stop being a fucking bitch? Anyway, they try to escape but get cornered on the mountain. But who else arrives but Claire to save them with a chopper and a sniper? That's cool, but what the fuck is up with this new look? She looks like someone threw Jill Valentine and Ada Wong in a blender. You could have just given her a tactical outfit. This whole redesign here is trash. And Resident Evil Death Island will pretend it never happened. Anyway, this is probably in my top 5 boss fights in the series. You can switch between Barry and Claire freely, and Barry is useful while Alex is hiding in caves, while Claire is useful outside. And in Resident Evil tradition, just like her brother, we blast that ass with a rocket launcher to save the day. I fucking love this franchise. Sadly, because Resident Evil 7 is about to come and fuck everything up to please boring ass people, you can kiss this rocket launcher tradition goodbye and say hello to Ethan getting snatched up by something at the end of the game while you just spam shots. Sauceless. That's not the end though. We still have to talk DLCs, but there really isn't much to talk about. The first is by far the better of the two, called The Struggle. It's about what happened in between the time Moira was trapped in the explosion and returned to save Barry. Ignoring how fucking baffling the fact that she seems completely unharmed outside of a headache is, the old man from the sewers has patched her up and they strike a deal. She can stick around, but she has to pull her weight in terms of surviving and hunting. Which brings me to my issue with this DLC, this dumbass hunting survival gimmick bullshit. Oh my god, dude. Gaming had this bizarre obsession for a little while around this time with stupid gimmick DLCs. How this works is that on a time limit, you explore around looking for rations, which function as your continues. If you run out, you have to restart the entire fucking DLC from the beginning. Wonderful idea, because if there's one thing I love in a game, it's it wasting my fucking time and all of my work. As well as rations, you'll be looking for other supplies like weapons, healing, you know. When you're ready, or you run out of time, you hold out against a horde, which is really where the fun is at. Now, the survival shit is annoying, but if you play the DLC on casual because your time is more valuable than gaming fads, you'll be fine at least in the first half. In the second half, they get the brilliant fucking idea to make you do a bunch of scavenging while being forced into stealth. So if you get spotted then, that's an instant forfeit and a skip to the horde section. Even writing this script, I'm fucking infuriated by how stupid these decisions are here. This DLC is only redeemed by 3 things. One is that it's still mercifully combat-focused DLC, which is more than I can say for the next one. 2 is that the bond that forms between Moira and this old man is very endearing, and his story is actually sad. And 3 is that more Moira is never a bad thing because I'm unapologetically a Moira simp. About the old man. His daughter actually worked as a miner that got suckered into Alex's schemes on the island and paid the price for it, being one of the monsters Barry fought in the main game. This old man has been surviving on his own, bitter and alone, until Moira gives him some companionship, before he eventually dies out of old age and sickness and tells her to escape the island, leading to her finding out that Barry is here and searching after him. The second DLC, on the other hand, is a complete fucking irredeemable waste of your time. The fact that I even had to play it or that I have to talk about it now makes me miserable because I really don't want to. Little Miss is a shitty stealth DLC, and you guys know how much I despise those, but on top of that, it is inconsistent mechanically with the main game. It starts with Natalia being trapped in her mind while Alex, called Dark Natalia, attempts to con her into befriending her by helping her find her little teddy bear. Unlike the main game, Natalia can't sense any of the infected, only Dark Natalia can. You can use Dark Natalia to scout ahead since the infected can't see or attack her, as she really doesn't exist, and then guide the real Natalia through the room, avoiding detection based off of patrol patterns. You can pick up smoke bottles to help get through some of the trickier rooms. There are a total of 3 or 4 chapters of this shit, and by the end of it I was begging for death. I wouldn't play this shit ever again for the $50 million that Jake wanted for a pint of his blood. All that really happens is Dark Natalia strings her along, trying and failing to convince her to leave her teddy bear behind and become best friends with her instead, so she can take control of her body. But Natalia doesn't go for that, so she just gives up and leaves, leading to Natalia standing on the dock where Barry finds her. If you like this shit, good for you, I guess. Enjoy. I personally can't stand it. In summary, neither of these DLCs are worth it. They fumbled this easy bag. Instead of 2 shitty gimmicky ones, you could have made a single, longer expansion story about Moira's survival. You had an entire 6 months of lore time in between Claire's campaign and Barry's campaign to work with, and could have just made a really good story at DLC with no gimmicks or bullshit attached to help her develop into a badass. She already looks the part by the time she saves Barry. This outfit is sick. I just wish it wasn't a slog to unlock in raid mode, which we will talk about now. Really, raid mode in this game is just raid mode in the first game, but better. Works mostly the same way. You pick a character, take them into missions as you upgrade and level up, personalizing and building their loadout and skill set to your liking. If you like the first game's raid mode, I can't imagine any reason you wouldn't love this one. Even Leon, Chris, and Wesker can get in on some of this. The gameplay of this game absolutely shines in this mode, and this and 6's Mercenaries are probably the most fun I've ever had with this series. In closing on Revelations 2, it's a fantastic Resident Evil game. Shitty DLC aside, it deserves its seat at the table with Resident Evil 4 and 6 as some of my favorite entries in the franchise. It even managed to make me care about a character I've never really liked in Barry. All Barry ever did was walk Jill like a toddler through every problem she ever faced in the old games on training wheels. But here he's shown to be every bit as badass and capable as Chris and Jill. And unlike the games we're about to talk about next, I can say the gameplay is slightly toned down from 6, but not watered down from 4 and 5. Ironically, sitting somewhere in between 5 and 6 in terms of gameplay overall. This franchise used to be so special, it really did. It had everything I wanted. Solid gameplay, lovable characters, even the one and dones. Infinite replayability, signature beloved weapons. You pick up something like a Desert Eagle in any other game, it's just that. In Resident Evil, it's that motherfucking Lightning Hawk. My favorite magnum in the franchise. Many other horror games have emerged, and while many give Resident Evil a good fight, right up about from Resident Evil 4 to here, nothing could ever compete with it. It was a giant. The classics, they have their charm, but games like Silent Hill started to come out and do what they did, but better. This era here, no horror franchise, not even Dead Space, as much as I love it, especially Dead Space 2, as much as I love that game to death, can say they managed to compete with this series in terms of bang for the buck around this time, nor popularity in sales. And that's me talking facts over feelings. Talking actual feelings, this is when I was the most in love with Resident Evil I've ever been. Resident Evil 4 came out January 2005. Resident Evil Revelations came out in February 2015. That means for 10 solid years, this franchise was the most treasured thing in gaming to me. I loved everything about it. And then I saw the first teaser trailer for Resident Evil 7 and my heart fucking shattered. But that's a tale for another time. I'll see you then.